Okay, so this is my audience. Here you go. Alright, so my name is Caitlin Dyer, and the conversation today and the topic today that we're going to be going over is about the nuclear meltdown of the 6 Lenin power plant, or better known as Chernobyl. That's what I learned it about. I didn't even know it was Lenin. Okay, so the fall of Chernobyl happened all because of human error in a test on April 26, 1986. So, a group of men were waiting for a maintenance check to go on around the whole building. So they decided to do a little test. They wanted to test and see if the core ever lost power, the whole building ever lost power, if they would be able to cool down the core. So they turned the power off and they couldn't get it back on. So the core overheated and eventually exploded. And in that process, they broke safety protocol by not having a backup system and other major safety protocols that you just cannot break in a nuclear power plant, because things such as this can go wrong. So, as the core started heating up, they tried to put down the control rods, which are used to manage the core's temperature, but they put them in far too late. If they had gotten there a few minutes earlier and put them in, they probably would have been fine, but either way, whatever was in that whole reactor number 4, whatever was in there, it got too hot and they just could not cool it down. Okay, so the surrounding cities, the main one was Pripyat, and they were not warned or evacuated until 36 hours later, which by that time, the radiation of the explosion had already spread to all the surrounding cities and just everywhere. And the people were not warned until after. Many things were left behind because the people were rushed out of their homes. Many things such as animals, valuable objects. Some of them couldn't even grab their clothing. They had to get out really fast because they had all already succumbed to some type of radiation. And some left their children, which I think, of all things to leave, you can't, that's just very unacceptable. So, shortly after the explosion, the people of the whole Chernobyl plant got together and they built a big metal box around the initial explosion site. They built the box so it would hold in all the radiation. And it still leaked out a little bit, so a few years later, I'm not exactly sure how many, I think it's 30 or so, they built a big metal dome over the metal box, so there's extra protection. So the metal dome is just literally just that around the whole building. And I would advise not going inside the metal dome, just me personally. So yeah, the children, even though they were only there for 36 hours after, and the parents too, and all the elderly, most of these children developed thyroid cancer and other severely long-term causes due to the radiation. And they had to undergo tests and shots and x-rays and everything just to see if they got anything else from it. Because everybody got the radiation. A lot of people got sick, a lot of people died. But the kids that didn't have long time, like thyroid cancer and just other things. Some people lost their limbs from it because it affected certain parts of them so bad they had to get it taken out. So there was a danger zone or an exclusion zone that spread 19 miles out from Chernobyl and the nuclear power plant. 19 miles from that out, nobody could go in for the longest time, except for the workers that were building the stuff around it. Let's see. And it's still zoned off today, but I think pretty sure it's still zoned off 19 miles out but you can visit it now, but you have to be wearing the proper attire, you have to be wearing a mask, and there's only certain places you can go, and there are big places you can't go, like the main building. You cannot go in there. And speaking of the main building, at the very basement of that, right under reactor number 4, the core melted all the way from where it was all the way to the basement. That's why they call it a meltdown, because everything just goes down as far as it can go. So it is a 2-ton wrinkled mass made up of wires, cords, cables, wood, metal, just anything that it had to melt through or go through just to get to the very basement of that building. Now, there was only one photograph for the longest time of it, and it is called the elephant's foot because at the very base, it is a really big, it's probably the size of this whole doorway. So it's big, it's shaped like an elephant's foot, and at the time there was one photograph, and a group of men went down there, and when they got to the corridor of it, so here's the corridor, there's a door right here, which is where it was. They got to the corridor, they peeked around the corner, they saw this big mass of radioactivity, radiation, just something you should not go and touch because it was half as hot as the sun. Maybe not half as hot, a little, but it's just everything from the reactor that blew up just melted down to the bottom, and it was still hot. It's still hot today, and this is many, many, many years after. It is still hot to the touch. And it is still trying to melt down past the concrete floor. And they're having an issue on trying to figure out how to stop it so it doesn't keep melting down because it is that hot. So the men, they knew they couldn't be in the room. You cannot be in a room with it after the initial explosion for more than 300 seconds, or you will get, you will start provosely vomiting, shaking, you'll get very bad headaches, a severe fever, and ultimately some people, not even hours later, died from being in that room. So it was a sacrifice for these people to take this picture. They did not get in the room with it, but they did roll a camera down the hallway to where it stopped right there and took a picture, and they rolled it back. But still, they were wearing protective gear, but still some of them got really sick and some of them still eventually passed away from the radiation. So even now, or just 30 years later, you still cannot be in the room with that large mass, the elephant's foot, for more than an hour without getting the radiation sickness and the provosely vomiting and everything. So I would say it's safe to say not to go in the room, or if you do, make sure you're timing yourself, you're wearing the proper gear, you have the mask on, goggles, because not a safe place to be. So the effects on wildlife. The wildlife population was slowly diminishing in that area before the explosion. The people of Pripyat and just areas around, they hunted wolves mostly because the wolf population was really big there. But the more that they kept hunting them, the more the population was diminishing. So when all the people got evacuated, the wolves weren't hunted anymore. So now the wolf population is higher than any other population in that place. The wolves live where people used to live. They hunt where people used to hunt them. Elk and just all of that, they just flourish now. Same goes for the plant life and the plant population there. Since people left, there's no one to tend to the plants that grow in the streets or anything. So there are literal vines crawling up the sides of buildings, crawling up lamp posts and street poles and stop signs, coming up from the earth and just cracking the earth and going up. I'm pretty sure the radiation had a little bit of help with that, but the whole situation is bad. But the earth got a little bit better for it because a whole bunch of animal species, their population growth went up, the plant growth went up. So I will say that's one of the upsides to it. It is still very bad because we are still getting radiation leaks to the United States as we speak in certain parts of it because it just leaked all the way from there to here, which is in the USSR. It leaks from there to here. So let me just give you a quick recap. The fall of Chernobyl was on April 26th. The main cause was human error. It was human error. It's just, you gotta have proper authority to say, let's do this test, because if you don't, you did it, you broke safety protocols, you didn't put something in soon enough, and then the whole plant exploded. When the initial explosion, two men died from it. Everybody else got radiation sickness and died later on, but 2 men died from the initial explosion because they were right next to the reactor. The surrounding cities were not warned until 36 hours after the explosion, after the air was all covered with toxic everything. There's a giant mass in the basement, which I watched a whole YouTube video on it. I think it's really cool. It is a certain type of metal that can only be made from nuclear meltdowns. And the plant life surrounding areas all got so much better from the meltdown. But that is my speech, and here is my audience again. Thank you for listening.